My name is Eleanor Grant, 72 years old, retired accountant, widow, mother of two, and according to the state of Massachusetts, legally incompetent. The first time I saw those words, they weren't in a letter or email. They were on the bank app I'd balanced every week for 40 years. Account access restricted. Guardianship order active. I thought it was a system error. I called customer service. The man on the line hesitated. Mrs. Grant, according to your file, your son is your financial guardian. You'll need his permission to speak with us. My son? Yes, ma'am. Andrew Grant. Joint authority with your daughter, Lydia Hart. The room went silent. The old clock ticked once, like it was counting the seconds between betrayal and realization. I hung up and drove straight to their firm, Grant and Hart Financial Advisors, a company I helped fund with my own savings. The receptionist smiled too brightly. Oh, Mrs. Grant, they're in a meeting. Should I tell them their client is here? Tell them their mother is here, I said. 10 minutes later, Andrew opened the door, polished smile in place. Lydia followed, perfume sharp, eyes already impatient. Mom, he said smoothly, you should have called first. I tried the bank first, I replied. They said I need your permission to access my own accounts. Lydia exchanged a quick look with him, then said gently, It's just paperwork. The guardianship helps us manage your finances after the stroke. My stroke was 2 months ago, and it was mild. My neurologist cleared me last week. Andrew sighed. Mom, this is for your protection. You've always been detail-oriented, sometimes overly so. Detail-oriented built you this firm, I said, and my name is still on every certificate framed in your lobby. Lydia placed a manicured hand on my arm. You don't need to stress about numbers anymore. We'll take care of everything. Define everything. Bills, investments, taxes, and the $300,000 wire from my retirement account last week? Silence. Andrew's voice cooled. You shouldn't dig into things you don't understand. I leaned forward. I understand compound interest, amortization, and fraud. Which one of those are we talking about? He looked past me to the receptionist. Get Mom some tea. I stood. Don't bother. I'll get my own. As I turned to leave, Lydia called after me, voice honey sweet. We're doing what's best for you, Mom. I looked back at them, their perfect suits, their false calm. You're doing what's easiest for you, I said, and you've just made your first accounting error. They laughed softly as I walked out. That night, I tried to log into my medical portal. Access denied, insurance canceled, utilities listed under alternate payer. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd erased my adulthood. I sat in the dark with my calculator and whispered to the empty room. You two want an audit? You've got one coming. 2 days later, I marched back to Grant and Hart Financial, the company my husband and I once bragged about at dinner parties. I wore my old Navy suit, the one I used for audits that scared grown men into fixing their books. The receptionist stood when she saw me. Mrs. Grant, your son asked me to— Not today, I said. If you call security, tell them to bring a calculator. I pushed open the glass door to Andrew's office. He was mid-call, all charm and performance. Mom, what are you— End it, I said. This is family accounting. He frowned but obeyed, because some habits die hard. Why are you doing this to me? I asked. He leaned back in his chair. Doing what? Transferring my funds, canceling my insurance, signing legal papers with my name spelled correctly but written by your pen? Andrew sighed like I was interrupting a golf swing. You're overreacting. Lydia and I are managing your finances so you can focus on your health. I've been balancing accounts since before you could spell deduction, I said. You think a mild stroke erased 40 years of math? Lydia swept in from the hall, phone in hand, lipstick perfect. Mom, please don't dramatize. You signed the guardianship. We only followed protocol. I signed a power of attorney for medical emergencies, not a declaration of incompetence. She smiled, all business. They're the same thing in practice. Not in law, I snapped. Her smirk faltered for half a second. Then she waved her phone like proof. We consulted attorneys. Everything's legitimate. Attorneys who get paid with my money? I said. Andrew stood. Mom, you're letting paranoia take over. You could have died that night. We had to act fast. Fast enough to transfer $300,000? He stiffened. We diversified your portfolio. Into what? New development ventures? Lydia's husband found an opportunity to use my retirement like seed money, I cut in. Lydia's tone turned brittle. You're embarrassing yourself. I took a step closer. No, dear. I'm remembering myself. For a moment, the room went dead quiet. The only sound was the steady tick of Andrew's expensive clock. I placed a single envelope on his desk, the latest statement from the bank showing the unauthorized wires. Here's your audit trail. You've got 48 hours to return every cent before I file an injunction. Lydia laughed nervously. An injunction? Against your own children? Yes, I said steady. And I'll win because I raised 2 financial advisors stupid enough to leave timestamps. Andrew clenched his jaw. If you file anything, we'll challenge it with your medical report. The doctor already confirmed mild cognitive decline. I froze. What doctor? Dr. Neal. He said, your neurologist. I never had a Dr. Neal. Lydia tilted her head. Then who signed your file? Mom? The blood drained from my face. They watched me realize it. The forged signature, the fake report, the legal declaration built on paper lies. Andrew's smile returned, cold and final. Go home, Mom. We'll handle it. I left without another word, my pulse louder than my footsteps. Outside, the sunlight felt wrong, like it was shining on someone else's name. In that moment, I knew this wasn't confusion or miscommunication. It was a hostile takeover, and I was the company being liquidated. The next week, my life turned into paperwork I didn't recognize. My phone plan was merged under family billing. My pension deposits redirected. The gas company called to confirm my move into assisted living. Even the post office forwarded my mail to my daughter's office suite. When I went to withdraw cash for groceries, the teller's smile collapsed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Grant. Your account lists Andrew Grant as authorized signatory. You're secondary now. Secondary. That word stung more than incompetent. I walked out and stood in the rain, watching strangers hurry past with umbrellas while I tried to remember what independence used to feel like. That night, I called Lydia. I can't access a single bill in my name. She sighed. Mom, that's the point. You're not supposed to stress about logistics. You've stolen everything. Stolen? That's dramatic. Her voice had that PR smoothness she used in interviews. You're protected. We're investing for growth. You'll thank us later. Did your father teach you that theft and growth were the same thing? She laughed lightly. Dad taught me control, Mom. You should be proud. I hung up before the word control could rot the air between us. Later that evening, I opened the last folder left on my desk, my husband's handwritten notes. He'd labeled it Emergency Ledger. Inside were codes for every joint account and a sealed letter addressed to me. I unfolded it slowly. His handwriting leaned slightly to the right. If anyone ever claims you can't manage what we built, check the signatures. Real ones leave fingerprints. Fakes leave smudges. Trust the numbers, Ellie. The next morning, I visited my old friend Ruth, a retired nurse who now volunteered at the local clinic. I asked if she could help me access my medical file. She looked uneasy but agreed. When the portal loaded, she frowned. That's not your neurologist. This report was uploaded from a different clinic 3 towns over. Diagnosis: early stage cognitive decline. But there's no imaging, no test, no date. I stared at the screen. The doctor's name, Dr. Neil L. Pritchard. The signature was sloppy, looped wrong, exactly the way Andrew wrote his capital N's. Ruth whispered, This is fraud, Ellie. Whoever filed this wanted legal control. I took a photo of the screen with shaking hands. That night, I drove to Andrew's gated house. His lights were on. Laughter floated from the backyard. Through the fence I saw them. Andrew, Lydia, their spouses, glasses raised. Here's to a clean transfer, Andrew said. Finally, no more battles with the old spreadsheet queen. They laughed. Even Lydia, my own daughter. My breath fogged the car window. For a moment I saw my reflection, wet hair, tired eyes, the woman they'd written out of her own life. I whispered, Enjoy your toast. Because I'd stop being the victim on their balance sheet. Tomorrow I'd start collecting evidence. When you've spent your life reconciling ledgers, betrayal doesn't end with heartbreak. It ends with a spreadsheet and a plan for justice. The next morning, I went to buy milk and bread at the small market down the block. My card declined. The cashier, a teenager who called everyone ma'am, tried again. Declined. I paid with quarters from my coat pocket and walked home clutching a brown paper bag like it held my last dignity. When I reached my porch, a notice fluttered under the door. Notice of guardianship enforcement, property access revoked. In the fine print, it said I was no longer the legal resident of my own house. My children had filed a temporary protective occupancy order. I stood there staring until the words blurred into fog. A neighbor saw me and asked if I was moving. I couldn't answer. That night, I tried to call Andrew again, straight to voicemail. Then Lydia. She answered but put me on speaker. Voices laughed faintly in the background. Mom, what's wrong now? Why is there a court order on my home? It's just precautionary, she said smoothly. Until the final guardianship review is approved. Don't worry. We'll handle utilities and taxes. You'll be reimbursed monthly. Reimbursed? Think of it as a stipend. You mean an allowance, I said quietly. She chuckled. Mom, stop making everything dramatic. Behind her, Andrew's voice cut through, distant but clear. Tell her it's for her own good. I heard him, I said. Tell him I'm still alive. Mom, you're overreacting. No, I'm underprotected. She sighed, exasperated. You're making us the bad guys. You did that yourself. She hung up. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where Henry's framed photo used to hang. They'd even taken that when they organized the house for me. I poured tea from an old kettle and watched the steam rise, curling like smoke from a slow-burning fire. I thought of calling a lawyer, but every firm I knew had ties to theirs. The only person who might still trust me was the young paralegal, Grace Patel, who'd once interned at my office before my retirement. She'd sent me a Christmas card last year. You taught me integrity as arithmetic for the soul. I found her email and wrote, Grace, I think my children forged a medical affidavit to seize my assets. Can you meet? She replied in 10 minutes. Tomorrow noon, bring every document you have. That night, the lights in my house flickered, then went out. Auto-pay disabled. I lit a candle. The silence felt heavier than the dark. On the counter sat my old calculator, the one Henry had given me when we first opened our joint account. I pressed the on button out of habit. The display blinked 0.00. Perfect balance, perfect emptiness. For the first time in 40 years, I cried without checking the time. When the sobs finally stopped, I whispered to the dark, they want to erase me on paper? Then let's play their game on paper. I turned the candle toward the wall where my degrees hung, shadows trembling behind the glass. If they wanted to make me legally incompetent, I'd make them financially extinct. By morning, my tears had dried into something sharper. Fear had turned into arithmetic. I made coffee, opened my husband's old ledger, and began a new page. Operation Reclaim. First column, assets seized. Second, transfer routes. Third, proofs needed. Years of running audits for other families had trained me for this. My own children forgot that beneath every gentle mother was an accountant who never left a number unbalanced. At noon, I met Grace Patel at a cafe near the courthouse. She looked surprised to see me carrying a box of files instead of a purse. Mrs. Grant, I read your email twice. You're accusing your own kids of medical and financial fraud? I'm not accusing, I said. I'm calculating. She flipped through my documents, power of attorney forms, account statements, the photo of that fake neurologist report. Her brows tightened. This signature style doesn't match the others. You're right. It's been forged. I leaned forward. How do we prove it? You'll need two things, she said. A verified handwriting analysis and a witness who saw them using your documents. I nodded slowly. I have both, just not yet. Grace smiled faintly. Then we start by freezing movement. I'll file a temporary restraining notice on the accounts. It'll stall any new transfers for 72 hours. Enough time to find my witness, I said. That evening, I drove to Lydia's office, pretending I wanted to reconcile. Her secretary greeted me kindly, unaware of the war beneath my smile. On the receptionist's desk sat a discarded binder labeled Asset Integration Grant Family Holdings. I asked, May I wait in the conference room? Of course, she said. The moment she turned away, I opened the binder halfway. There it was, A printed memo. Transfer all funds from EG Retirement Trust to L. Hart personal accounts before audit confirmation, 5/16 deadline. I took a discreet photo. My pulse barely wavered. That night, I called the family's former financial advisor, Martin Lowe, who'd resigned last winter after a disagreement with Andrew. I asked him, "Did you ever sign off on a full portfolio shift?" He exhaled. "No, they bypassed me. I warned your son it bordered on elder exploitation." He laughed. "Would you say that under oath?" He paused, then said, "For you, yes." By dawn, I had a paper trail, a witness, and a frozen system. Then came the hardest part, the confrontation setup. I invited Andrew and Lydia to dinner at the old house. "To talk things out," I said sweetly. Lydia accepted instantly. Arrogance was her favorite appetizer. I spent the next day printing every document, labeling each folder, and placing one final item on the table, the handwritten letter from Henry. It would be the last thing they expected, their father's ghost in ink, ready to testify from beyond the grave. Before I turned off the light that night, I whispered, "You used my name to steal my life. Now I'll use your greed to prove mine still counts." For the first time in months, I slept 8 hours straight. Because revenge, when done correctly, feels like balancing the books. A calm, perfect zero before the storm. The table was set like old times, near polished silverware, linen napkins, and the smell of rosemary chicken filling the air. It almost fooled me into forgetting that this was a war disguised as dinner. At 7 sharp, Andrew and Lydia arrived. Andrew wore his success like armor, press suit, cufflinks, that expensive watch I'd helped him buy after his first promotion. Lydia followed, heels clicking across the hardwood floor like a countdown. "Mom, this looks wonderful," she said, glancing around the dining room they'd already claimed as theirs. "See, this is what I meant. You shouldn't be living alone." "Let's eat first," I said evenly. "We can talk afterward." Andrew poured himself wine without asking. "Glad you're finally being reasonable." Reasonable. That was their favorite word for obedience. Halfway through dinner, I set down my fork. "Andrew, I found something interesting. Did you know the neurologist who declared me incompetent doesn't exist?" His glass froze midair. "What?" I slid a folder across the table. "The medical board has no record of Dr. Neil Pritchard. Grace checked. The license number belongs to a veterinarian in Indiana." Lydia tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway out. "Mom, you must have mixed up," I interrupted. "No, but whoever signed that report copied your husband's handwriting pattern, loops and all." Andrew's face reddened. "You broke into private files?" "Private?" I smiled. "They were mine." The air thickened. Lydia stood pacing. "Mom, stop. You don't know what you're doing." I picked up the second folder. "This says otherwise. You diverted $300,000 from my retirement to your personal fund labeled L. Hart Investment Seed. Martin Lowe verified it. He's willing to testify." Andrew slammed his glass down. "You're bluffing." I leaned forward, calm. "If I were bluffing, you wouldn't have just confessed in front of a recorder?" Lydia's head snapped up. "What?" I pointed to the small black device tucked near the candlestick. Its red light blinked steadily. For the first time, neither of them had words. "You both framed me as senile, forged medical proof, seized my home, and drained my accounts," I said softly. "But here's the thing about financial abuse. It leaves fingerprints in every transfer. You never learn to wipe the metadata." Andrew looked at Lydia, then back at me. "You wouldn't press charges." I smiled. "I already did." There was a knock on the door. 2 officers stepped in, led by a woman with a badge. Grace's contact from the Financial Crimes Unit. "Mrs. Grant?" she said. "We received your report. We're here to collect statements." Lydia's voice rose, frantic. "You can't arrest us. This is family business." The officer replied coolly, "Ma'am, fraud doesn't stop at family." Andrew tried to speak, but his phone buzzed. The officer confiscated it. "Bank notice," she said. "All transfers have been flagged." I stood steady. "I told you 2 days ago. 48 hours. That window just closed." As they were escorted out, Lydia shouted, "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, dear, I'll finally rest." The door shut behind them, and for a moment the house fell silent. No footsteps, no excuses, just the soft hum of justice finally catching up. I walked to the ledger on the counter and drew one last line beneath the total. Balance restored, but deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Families like ours don't shatter quietly. The next round would be public. Courtrooms, headlines, maybe even whispers at the country club, and I was ready for all of it. The story broke before sunrise. Local news ran the headline: Financial advisors accused of exploiting mother in $300K guardianship fraud. The photo showed Andrew and Lydia walking out of the police station, heads down, faces lit by the cold flash of cameras. I didn't watch it live. Grace texted me the clip. "They'll fight it, Mrs. Grant, but the evidence is airtight." Still, victory didn't feel clean. Watching your own children handcuffed is a punishment no court can deliver gently. By afternoon, reporters parked on my street. One shouted, "Mrs. Grant, did your children really forge your medical records?" I didn't answer. I simply handed them a printed statement. I believe in numbers. They tell their own truth. That night, Andrew called from the county holding center. His voice was a wreck, half fury, half pleading. "Mom, you ruined us." "No," I said quietly. "You did when you tried to erase me." "You think this makes you the hero?" "I'm not interested in being a hero," I said. "Just solvent." He cursed, then broke down. "It was Lydia's idea, all of it. I just signed what she told me." I didn't respond. Maybe that was the cruelest thing. Silence from a mother he thought would always forgive. But the next morning, things turned again. Grace called, voice tense. "Mrs. Grant, you need to see this." Lydia had filed an emergency motion claiming I coerced them into transferring assets years ago, that I'd hidden mental decline and blackmailed them with fake ledgers. They flipped the script. Grace sighed. "They're leveraging your age, trying to paint you as vindictive." "Then we show them the math," I said. "Real timestamps, not fiction." We prepared everything for the hearing, every proof, every wire record, every photo of their forged medical file. Still, I knew perception could ruin truth faster than ink. When I walked into the courtroom that Friday, half the gallery was filled with reporters. Lydia looked flawless in a beige suit. Andrew stared at the floor like a child sent to detention. Their attorney stood tall. "Your Honor, our clients acted under legitimate concern for their mother's mental health," Grace interrupted, sliding a USB across the table. "Play Exhibit C." On screen appeared the dinner recording. Andrew's voice. "You diverted $300,000 from my retirement?" Followed by Lydia's hissed whisper, "You're bluffing." The courtroom went dead silent. Then my husband's letter appeared, projected for all to see. The judge read it aloud. "If anyone claims you can't manage what we built, check the signatures. Real ones leave fingerprints. Fakes leave smudges. Trust the numbers, Ellie." I looked straight at my children. Lydia's poise cracked. Andrew covered his face. The judge leaned back. "This court finds clear evidence of financial exploitation and falsified medical documentation." He turned toward them. "You're lucky your mother still calls you family." Outside, microphones flew toward me again. I said only one sentence. They took my name from the papers, so I put it back in ink. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The fireplace glowed, soft and steady. For the first time, the silence didn't ache. Justice isn't loud. It's the quiet hum after the storm, when even betrayal runs out of words. 3 months later, the house was mine again. Not because of pity, because the law said so. The judge voided every transfer, restored my ownership, and ordered restitution from both Andrew and Lydia. Their accounts were liquidated to repay what they'd stolen. I didn't celebrate. I just replaced the lock they'd changed. The neighborhood stayed quiet for weeks after the verdict. People waved from afar, unsure what to say to the woman who'd taken her own children to court and won. I didn't mind the distance. Silence, when earned, feels like luxury. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a short note. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't deserve forgiveness, but Becca should know the truth someday. Andrew." I sat at the table for a long time, tracing the ink with my thumb. It wasn't redemption, but it was acknowledgement. the first honest signature he'd made in years. That evening, I walked to the garden Henry and I once planted. The soil was dry but alive. I kneeled down and planted 3 rose bushes, one for him, one for the woman I used to be, and one for the mother who finally chose herself. As I worked, the mailbox creaked. My neighbor Ruth appeared with 2 cups of tea. "Heard they finally settled," she said softly. "They did," she smiled. "You must feel proud." I shook my head. Not proud. Balanced. We sat on the steps as the sun slid down the sky, casting long gold shadows across the yard. The house behind me wasn't just bricks. It was a statement. I'm still here. My name still counts. Later that night, I opened my ledger again, the one I'd used since all this began. On the final page, under Operation Reclaim, I wrote one more line. Outcome, justice delivered. Cost, motherhood lost. Balance, acceptable. I closed the book and placed it beside Henry's photo. His smile in that picture, calm, patient, knowing, seemed to tell me I'd done enough. The next morning, I met Grace at the same cafe where we first planned the fight. She looked relieved, proud even. "So what's next for you, Mrs. Grant?" I smiled. "Something honest," she tilted her head. "Like what?" "I'm going to teach a free class for seniors, how to read their own statements, how to catch a forged signature before it costs them their life." Grace grinned. "You're turning revenge into reform." "Maybe," I said, sipping my coffee, "but I'm doing it under my own name this time." When I came home that evening, a warm light filled the living room. The clock ticked steadily, not the sound of waiting anymore, but of moving forward. I sat by the window, watching dusk settle on the street I'd reclaimed. There were no more lawyers, no more reporters, no more concerned phone calls. Just peace, quiet, earned, deliberate. And if anyone ever asks how I survived losing my children to greed, I'll tell them this. You don't survive it, you audit it. You calculate the cost, close the account, and start again. Because I'm Eleanor Grant, not the victim in someone else's ledger, but the woman who learned that dignity is its own inheritance. I choose me. Tell me what you'd do. Drop your story and subscribe Revenge Stories Women 65 Plus USA.